On February 1st, the Trump administration imposed an additional 10% tariff on goods coming into the country from China. The reason given was that the fentanyl drug is entering the US from China and illegal immigrants are also arriving. Fentanyl is a major problem in America at the moment. It is 50 to 100 times more potent than the commonly used painkiller morphine. Due to this high potency, fentanyl overdose is very common. Every year, more than 100,000 people lose their lives in the US due to drug overdoses, making it a major crisis in America. To address this issue, the US wants to prevent fentanyl manufactured in China from entering the country. As a pressure tactic, the Trump administration has imposed an additional 10% tariff on Chinese exports. It is important to note that these are additional tariffs. The total tariff on goods coming from China to the US is not just 10%. There were already existing tariffs, and now an extra 10% has been imposed on top of them. Trump had also imposed tariffs on China during his first term in 2018. The Biden administration did not lift these tariffs but continued them. Since these tariffs already existed, the new 10% tariff will be levied on top of them. If we calculate the total, currently around 35% tariffs are being imposed on Chinese products in the US. This means that if a Chinese product is worth $100, it will be sold in America for $135 due to the tariffs. Now, what will happen due to this? The cost of Chinese products will increase, making Chinese goods more expensive. As a result, people will start looking for alternatives to these costly products and will prefer cheaper options. This will decrease the demand for Chinese products. If demand decreases, Chinese exports will decline, leading to a drop in its export revenue. This has already happened before. The tariffs that Trump imposed on China during his first term in 2018 had a negative impact on Chinese exports. By 2023, Mexico surpassed China as the top exporter to the US. China had held this position for 20 years, but due to these tariffs, Mexico overtook China in 2023. Now, as soon as Trump came to power again, he reimposed tariffs on China. However, China was prepared for this. It knew that just as he imposed tariffs in his first term, he would do the same in his second term. Trump is entirely predictable in these matters. He takes a protectionist stance, imposes tariffs on nations, and reduces corporate and personal income taxes in the US. These aspects of his policies are well known and expected. Therefore, China was already prepared for this. For China, Trump's move was neither unexpected nor surprising. China was ready and immediately filed a complaint against the US at the WTO, describing the US tariffs as discriminatory and protectionist. However, this complaint will not have any impact. What will have an impact though is China's announcement of retaliatory tariffs on US goods. In response to Trump's tariffs, China will impose tariffs of 10 to 15% on US goods starting February 10. Not only that, but it will also launch an antitrust investigation against the US company Google, targeting its Android operating system. In this way, China aims to gain leverage in trade negotiations with the US. China understands that by imposing tariffs, Trump seeks to influence the policies of other countries in America's favor. He wants to shape their policies and, by applying pressure through tariffs, secure a deal beneficial to the US. The message is clear. If a favorable deal is reached, tariffs will not be imposed. Thus, tariffs serve as a bargaining tactic for Trump. Note that he is not imposing tariffs only on adversaries, he is even targeting allies. For example, he announced 25% tariffs on Canada, despite Canada being a US ally. Trump has even threatened to impose tariffs on the European Union. In essence, he is using tariffs to pressure countries, friendly or not friendly, into aligning their policies with US interests. Understand why Trump is doing this. If we take into account the combined share of Canada, Mexico, and China in the goods imported by the US, it exceeds 40%. Around 15.5% of US imports come from Mexico, approximately 13.5% from China, and about 12.5% from Canada. By imposing tariffs on these countries, Trump aims to compensate for the annual revenue shortfall of $300 to $350 billion. With tariff revenues, he can partially offset the reduction in the revenue due to lowering corporate and personal income taxes. However, the major issue here is that the projected revenue is based on the assumption that import volumes will remain unchanged. The revenue calculations are made using current import levels. But will the same volume of goods continue to come in after imposing tariffs? No. When tariffs are imposed, goods from these countries become more expensive and importers will pass on the increased costs to consumers. As prices rise, demand will fall. Consequently, the volume of imported goods will decrease. And when import volumes decline, the estimated tariff revenue will also drop. American importers will start looking for alternative sources. Obviously, the countries on which the US imposes tariffs will start seeking alternative destinations. If goods become expensive in the US or there is a shortage, the Trump government will face pressure. We saw that the cost of living crisis was a major issue in the 2024 elections. So, these tariffs will not be sustainable in the long term. The countries on which you impose tariffs will also retaliate. China has already retaliated and Canada and Mexico have also threatened to do so. If tariffs are imposed on other countries, US goods will become more expensive there. US exporters will face difficulties and the administration will come under pressure from them as well. So, the political cost of suddenly announcing tariffs will have to be reckoned with. Now, other countries are realizing that these tariffs are not sustainable. Trump is only using them as a bargaining tool and is granting concessions through negotiations. He is also known as a tough negotiator and deal maker. Within a few days of taking office, he has adopted a dominant stance. He wants to reinvent American supremacy and make America great. So, he would not want to harm US interests. We also saw this in the case of Canada and Mexico. Trump imposed 25% tariffs on both countries. In response, Mexico and Canada also threatened retaliation. Then, negotiations took place, and when both countries agreed to incorporate the measures the US demanded, Trump immediately paused the trade tariffs. Before they could be implemented, he suspended them for 30 days. So, tariffs are Trump's way of getting things done. Trump wants to boost manufacturing in America. He wants to reduce dependence on China, but this will happen gradually. At present, the US is not in a position to completely decouple from China or engage in an all-out trade war. The interdependence between the two countries will not end overnight. The supply chains that have been deeply integrated over decades will take time to shift to other countries. Strengthening domestic industries and boosting manufacturing will require significant time and investment. All of this does not happen suddenly. Since Trump is also a businessman, he understands that a trade war with China would lead to economic disruption, shortages, higher consumer prices, and an impact on the country's GDP. China is well aware that the US wants to reduce its dependence on it, but this cannot be achieved in the short term. Trump prioritizes American interests and follows an America First approach. Now, a trade war with China would also harm the US. That is why he would not want an all-out trade war. While he has imposed tariffs, he will continue to engage in discussions and negotiations with China. Last month, in January, Trump spoke to Chinese President Xi Jinping over the phone, invited him to his inauguration ceremony, and, while addressing the media after taking the oath, mentioned his plan to visit China within the next 100 days. This makes it clear that he is interested in maintaining a productive relationship with China. Therefore, China, understanding the reasons behind Trump's tariffs, is not overly concerned about them. China is currently focusing on its economic recovery. It had anticipated that Trump would adopt such policies. China is closely observing Trump's moves, sitting patiently and planning a long-term strategy. This is Trump's last term. After this, he will not be able to contest for the presidency as per the US Constitution. His tenure will end in the next 4 years. Until then, China will try to mitigate the economic impact of Trump's erratic policies and follow a strategic, long-term approach. It will focus on strengthening its resilience and diversifying its trade partnerships with other countries. We are already seeing China investing in infrastructure and development projects worldwide, seeking new markets for its goods and services, increasing its global influence, and advancing rapidly in AI race. Thus, China is addressing immediate challenges posed by the US while also laying the groundwork for long-term stability and growth to reduce its vulnerabilities to future economic pressures.